Hello, and welcome to the Space for Humanity sponsored Universal Inclusion podcast. In this initial series, we're amplifying voices of diversity in the space industry, listening to the many paths there are to take, and learning lessons of how to overcome both professional and personal barriers. Hi, I'm your host, Aisha, and I'm the founder and CEO of Universal Inclusion, as well as the Director of Programs at Space for Humanity. Martina Dimoska is an award-winning research scholar, engineer, and pioneering space explorer. As the first Macedonian and female Balkan analog astronaut, she has served on many space agency-funded missions and holds a suborbital spaceflight certification as a senior NASTAR ambassador. Martina is the national point of contact for the Space Generation Advisory Council for North Macedonia, and in 2022 won their Emerging Space Leader Award. She's the founder and president of the International Space Alliance, bridging the gap between agencies, industry, and academia to expand space opportunities in developing regions. As a STEM educator, Martina promotes diversity and inclusivity in space exploration through workshops and social media outreach with the popular handle @astro_smarta. Hello and welcome to the podcast, Martina.
Hello, Aisha. I'm so excited to be here.
So tell us, what led you to space?
My path towards space exploration is called the ultimate pursuit of truth. So I grew up with a sister with disabilities, and she had an exceptional mind, but she could not walk. And I come from a really small country where so many things are not as developed, and people who have disabilities are not fully accepted. So I had to find creative ways to both assimilate her in society, but also keep her mind engaged because me and my mom were fighting for her to be included both in school and in society. And we still had to be isolated in a way and live in a way of a bubble where we could solve problems and dream on and imagine. So I was always both a curious kid, but also a really studious kid, where I could pursue so many interesting things from crafting to mathematics and physics, and then future on space exploration. For me and her, the universe was so interesting. There were so many mysteries that we could try to imagine or solve, and we were always quite imaginative. So I always felt like that ultimate pursuit of truth meant so much for both me and her, to just keep her engaged but also solve problems with her creatively so she can have so much fun when we were building things.
You know, it's so disappointing to hear when kids with disabilities don't have a society that integrates them and sees them as equal. And I think it's really beautiful that you and your mother created a bubble, a beautiful bubble. And that exploration and creativity needed to build that bubble also, it seems like it led you down the path to being really adept at overcoming barriers. So, biggest barrier of all being that you come from a country that doesn't have a space agency, and at the time didn't really have a lot of organizations or even clubs in the space industry.
Even now, the access to space when you are from North Macedonia or the Balkan region is quite limited. We still don't have those clubs or no space infrastructure, industry, or space agency. So that type of isolation that I felt with my sister growing up from not being accepted in the in the society was also translated in the space sector. For those who don't know, you do have to be extraordinary, but you cannot really participate in space leading countries just because of so many regulations like ITAR, where you have to be a resident or a citizen, meaning you kind of have to have a green card to belong. And that process is so strenuous, it's so expensive. So you only get to either work only tad bit with the hours that you have under your student visas, and you're not quite allowed in. You cannot go into a NASA center, for example. You cannot really visit or have those hands-on internships that other people have. So it does take quite a toll on you. You always are in a suitcase, changing so many time zones and climates, and it does take a toll on you. You're far away from your family family and your close friends. You have to hop from opportunity to opportunity, from country to country, from culture to culture, and it's so much physical toll, emotional toll. You are giving your years in that. You're giving so much sleep debt by sleep deprivation, and your health is suffering, and your youth is gone while you're trying to prove yourself.
I think the biggest thing is even if you are the best of the best of the best, when there's so few opportunities, you might not be able to connect the dots in your career and have the trajectory that you're hoping for. So, something I see so much at Universal Inclusion, we share resources for folks getting started in industry or propelling their career forward. So, that's like scholarships, fellowships, job opportunities, things like that. And it is so glaringly obvious that there is a lack of opportunity and resources available for folks outside of North America and Europe or tied to a country with a space agency that usually does massage out some more opportunities in industry. And with those opportunities being so far and few between, there just isn't this guarantee that you'll land one of these opportunities. And I think that might be contributing to some of the stress when you go out and want to pursue a career in the space industry.
That's so true. For example, for so many of my studies, usually when people enroll, they're supported by the space agency. If they're coming from a country outside of the US, but they have a space agency that has a pathway with NASA, let's say, they can have tracks that's gonna exactly give them the steps of how to get there. And for the rest of us coming from countries that don't have a space agency or a space industry, we're kind of like all in one batch, and we're fighting for that maybe one scholarship that university is offering, and we're kind of like pitted against each other in that way, where everybody has to be more exceptional and more dedicated. And so many of us have to, work a second job or sustain ourselves somehow if we're not coming from a more privileged background. And then again, that toll to belong into one system or a community is really, it's extensively bureaucratic. You, for example, miss your so many of your family celebrations, and you're missing all of the family funerals and the births given and milestones. And even, let's say, if you want to be a young mother and you have to choose, either you're going to be a young mom or you're going to, devote your time to the career. So there's so many sacrifices that you have to give if you want to pursue something like that. For me, I'm still not there yet. Yet it took 10 years of my life hopping from opportunity to opportunity, just to find those rare scholarships that I had to compete with the whole rest of the world with to just get that one.
And this backlog of qualified and overqualified, I'd say I run across a lot of overqualified folks going for the same opportunities, right? But what I see from that group is there is this beautiful occurrence where they create their own opportunity to have a little bit of security in an experience. And so that could look like starting up a nonprofit or a small space startup, something, that can attach them to industry, give them experience, and showcase their skill. But what I've seen as well in creating that, there seems to be two routes. The first route is, someone that has intergenerational wealth and they're very resourced from families. And so they can kind of go it on their own to branch out and create this opportunity for themselves. And they don't need to really worry about working. And they can kind of put some money towards having possibly a small team and some marketing, which is actually more important than you'd realize with these organizations and companies. To get your name out there, you have to get your name out there. But they are putting in work. I'm not taking anything away from that, but it is a different experience than the
Mhm.
second group. And the second group really having to bootstrap the whole thing themselves. What I notice is that it takes longer and the focus is really, really, really on the work. And so I don't usually come across as often the second group because they're not also putting a lot of, understandably so, resources towards marketing. So sometimes it's hard to know these people doing amazing work in niches of the world. Um, but so it's kind of like the first group you kind of hit first, and then as you continue to dig and get to learn about what's going on in different countries, you run into the second group. So that's kind of my observation as a bystander.
Yeah, those are two sort of like tracks. Into the one cluster, you have the privileged kids that come from a different bubble in their society where they can be anything they want to be. They can, be the prima ballerina just because they have the resources to have that sustained lifestyle, or they can be the concert pianist, or they can be the 17-year-old founder that had so much money just from his family circle and launched a successful NGO business and, can have that pilot's license, for example. I'm definitely in the other camp where I had to do my own work. For example, I was heavily reliant on scholarships and I had to also work. And that means it impacts your performance. You have the same amount of hours, you're just more stressed. You're concerned about your next month and how you're going to go through that month. And then you cannot buy that dinner to that young CEO coming to teach a lecture so you can network. You cannot pay that ticket to that gala. You cannot take the flight to this conference, and you cannot pay a team. You have to have um, octopus hands and do everything and learn so much. And until you can assemble a small team, and it does take longer, and it does underqualify you in the eyes of the masses just because you cannot showcase it, highlight it, or you're always so stressed or sleep deprived, or your performance suffers, whether the other side can usually endure more and have more. And there's so many social cues tied to wealth and to class that if you're not in the know, or aware, you're gonna miss on that and miss on some truly exceptional people.
Exactly. I really stress when you're wanting to do and make international connections to really dig into the region, to find those folks that have, like you said, octopus hands doing a million things, but might not be having an active social media presence or able to go to all the international conferences because cha-ching, that costs a ton of money as well. And if you can even get a visa into that
Yeah.
country, there's like so many barriers.
Yeah.
Something else I find really interesting is that I've heard a lot in the West this idea that, if we just had people going to remote places to inspire, just having, let's say, a commercial flyer go to a region, go to a village and inspire and show the kids that they can do it. But what they don't understand, the nuances in those countries where there's extreme disparity with opportunity, that might not hit for that group, for those kids, and it's actually possibly putting more in their face. These various um, you know boundaries, invisible lines that are within their society that we might not fully know, just because maybe they've gone to an international school or they've gone to NASA for an internship and then come back and show at schools. Well, there's so many small steps there that might be really, really unattainable for folks in that second camp that are having to bootstrap their education. I mean, they could be even bootstrapping their high school education. So I think it's
Yeah.
important that we think all the way through about how we're looking at inspiring everyone.
That's really an interesting perspective, just because if you have somebody that's coming from so much, it can be sometimes counterproductive to the people who don't even have the pathway or don't know how to even get there. Let's say I'm a first generation college graduate in my in my family. So I don't know who to ask of how to file my college application. I don't know where in high school I should start preparing for the best TOEFL score or whatever the best score is there, or when the applications, start. If you don't have the resources when it comes to just finances or the knowledge, the know-how in your community of people actually building that or being there, you won't know how to do that, and you're going to miss on so much. Additionally, I come from a country that has a corruption in every facet and every pore of society. So by default, you know that you can never be a fighter pilot in the army just because there's only 10 slots on several years, and that's for the top elite, most powerful people and their kids in the country. So I don't know what to say to kids that have, their eyes full of hope, and they finally see me and they say, I could never know. I can, dream to be an astronaut coming from here. Now with you, I can do that. How do I tell them that I had to sacrifice 10 years of my life, that I had no one, that I made so many mistakes until I figured it out, and that costed me and my career and and who I am as a person? And if I don't know how to explain to them how much it takes of sacrifice and that there's no pathway and that I had no one to teach me. Yes, maybe I can break the glass ceiling and I can give them the lessons of the industry and what's right from wrong, what's a good opportunity from a bad opportunity, what's a good PR versus a questionable PR, etc., from the lessons learned, but I cannot ask them to sacrifice so much. So there's always that barrier, and it does help when we try to send the proper fits of people to a proper place, but it's not only for them to visit. They have to really try to learn the culture and try to live there to understand the hurdles. I had so many people coming in my country to volunteer and thinking they will do the impossible just to get stuck and ask me how am I enduring this in the first several months of nothing working and of so many intricate pathways that come with the culture.
My background, my first degree is in international development studies. And I took it, not to date myself, but I took it many years ago at a time when there was still this discourse that, um, the West has a lot of answers. And if we just put in XYZ and we do the formula, that we can support quote unquote developing countries. And I had some really great professors at that time that they were teaching these courses and being like, actually, guys, this is completely false. Because the reality is, you have no idea what's going on in that country or in that specific region of that country. It is so varied, and there's so many things that you'll never have insight if you want to successfully support. And by support, it's not giving everything, giving all the answers, but support folks. You need to go and be really dedicated to empower folks from those communities because they'll inherently get it, what's going on. Um, and so, that's a grassroots movement. And I think that because the space industry has been focused so heavily on the sciences, understandably so, that looking at
Yeah.
different discourses like the social sciences, when it comes to this question of equity and DEI, they're not potentially understanding the full story of how folks really aren't even though there's a few scholarships here and there, um, people aren't starting on the same playing field. And if you really want to make a difference, you're going to have to really sit down with communities, understand what's going on, put in supports, and that'll look different in different regions of the world.
That's true. And usually, when it comes to experiences like women in space or women trying to conquer some of the Western civilizations in the space sector, they do have a lot of giving up to do. Additionally, on top of all of that sacrifice, they either have to bring their identity or their culture that doesn't match the Western values or norms or ways of life or communication, or ditch that and completely isolate themselves from back home, coming into the new country trying to belong. I had so many conversations with so many women that are like, okay, I had to give so many years of my life, also living in a suitcase, and now I have to choose. Do my family will my family support me and accept my role as a researcher and as a scientist and somebody who's not a traditional housewife or a traditional religious person or XYZ that comes with the weight of that culture or those norms? Or do I just, ditch all of that, put it behind and go in this new culture and try to find myself again? And that's quite challenging when you're having to have such a split of personality because with initiatives like the ones you've mentioned, we try to learn more and we try to understand more and we try to kind of like grasp the entire being of that persona without just classifying it in a cube. Oh, you have to be this to be successful, and everything else is not valid.
Yeah, there's so much sacrifice that's needed to end up just at the table. Um, in where there's major decisions happening, major industry happening in the space industry right now. Now I know that you are working hard though to try and combat that. So let's talk about your organization, the International Space Alliance, ISA. Tell me about the creation. Tell me about what it does.
International Space Science was created because I had nothing else and no other choice. So I obviously did so many things in the space sector, from research to fellowships to hackathons and event making to literally everything on which I could put my hands on, first and foremost as a volunteer, just to, again, gain that experience because of the imposter syndrome coming from a space with no space agency. And granted, it did take me quite some time to have that learning curve filled with so many incredible people teaching me or programs and scholarships, but it came out of necessity. ISA is made because I was going everywhere somewhere on my own, and I was like, okay, I have this great idea, and or I have this great, hackathon for you. And they were like, but you need an entity. So I made it because I needed a pathway that was going to be legal, just because on so many places, that's another barrier. You cannot show up as a person. You need some kind of a legal entity through which you can streamline so many things. So International Space Alliance started in North Macedonia, actually in my hometown, Kichivo, and it's a few years in its existence. And we have so many grants that build capacity, and we've been international. We did not only build capacities and won grants in Macedonia and in the Balkan region. We did so many workshops and events and courses from India to South America to Europe to Africa. Now there's the African Space Alliance, and we were there in the opening ceremony as honored guests that unites Africa, and also in the US. And now ISA is also registered as a non-for-profit that's tax deductible in California, and we're trying to operate there. The whole reason of why ISA is there is because I wanted to open doors and create pathways for underprivileged communities in underdeveloped regions. And those exist everywhere, from space bearing countries to the Balkan region where we have close to nothing.
That's unbelievable. I think that folks that start out with, let me just make an opportunity for myself, the first roadblock is truly that they're like, how do I create an organization? And do I do a nonprofit or do I do a company? Do I do a limited? And, this will look different in different countries as well, what you can set up. The taxes, the bookkeeping. Oh my goodness. There's so many
Yeah.
elements. Can you just tell us about the time it took? Because I think this is a huge success that you can get donations in Europe and bursaries in Europe as well as in the US. Like, what kind of timeline did that take?
Just to set up ISA as an idea, it took me 3 to 4 years. And then to officially establish ISA legally as an entity, it took me 2 years of a continuous learning curve. So 5 to 6 years in total, just from like, okay, how do I do this as a non-person, as an entity? What do I need to do? Do I found a startup? Do I found an NGO? All of that, asking around and trying to learn and trying to research as much as possible. Um, I've tried to make ISA just because we have some NASA agreements, and for the NASA Space Up Challenge that I was hosting, and NASA Ames and NASA Glenn, we had to get so many things right and do things and get clearances from so many organizations. So ISA now is really successful. We have an EU code, we have a NATO code, we are eligible for SAM-DUNS. That's the government way of applying things for the US government. And we're trying to set up so many things structure wise that takes so many years. So it's still an ongoing learning curve for me, but it took me almost 6 years to set the whole thing up. And only later did it become profitable. So still, like, you're going to set the whole thing, it's going to be dormant, you're going to get all of the clearances and all the documents and figure everything out. And then you still have to apply for grants and still have to start small because people don't trust a newcomer, and then build up by proving those small things to bigger opportunities.
So, still, if you make your own opportunity, it's not an easy, clear path. There's still roadblocks and it
No.
still takes a lot of effort. So, someone who is, let's say, starting their own organization, what would be your biggest piece of advice for them?
Don't panic. Because um it can be so overwhelming, especially if you're a space professional. For my journey, I did research, I did publications of papers, I did lab work, I did analog astronaut missions, and I feel like everybody in the space sector is so exceptional. But taking time and taking things at a slower pace can be so helpful. Just because it's a lot of work and you cannot avoid it. And eventually you do need to have a life and build some relationships. Yes, maybe I'm used to the isolation story, driving back way back when from my sister to the space sector being so familiar, but it's not everybody's journey, right? So, and it's not okay to ask for a sacrifice from everyone in the same path. You want to make it easier, right? So first and foremost, don't panic. Give yourself some time, prioritize your well-being and your health, obviously, sleep enough, eat enough, and take things one thing at a time. For me, I was really bad at bureaucracy. Now I'm great at it. Like, that was not my forte. I was just an engineer trying to do both things and solve problems and comfortable in a lab. But I also hone in this new skill of bureaucracy. The biggest thing is to do things timely, in a timely manner, and give yourself some time to for them to season, for you to understand them, and for you to develop them. Don't panic. Tap in your network. Ask for advice. There are so many people who went through your pathway and that would love to unite.
Exactly. Don't feel, I think, to a lot of folks coming from, this overqualified area of lots of degrees, lots of certifications, they're used to having the A plus. And so,
Yeah,
my piece of advice is you're going to fail at some parts.
that's true.
And, for me, it's the bookkeeping. And so, there's definitely a huge learning curve when it comes to that, when it comes to the taxes. So I think just be open to not being the best at everything when you set up your organization. um, I think creating a collective is so smart to get folks that are really aligned to see maybe if they want to do a collective together to try and take the burden of an organization off of just one person. Let me ask you something else, if we can switch topics for a while,
Mhm.
and that is about social
Yeah,
media. So, that is something else that I see a huge variance in the West and other parts of the world is that, this kind of combo of being a scientist and a social media personality, but that's not always a positive in some places of the world.
it's not. And I definitely personally struggle for that because in the West, you need to have a personal brand to be known and to be vocal, to be considered that you have a media presence. While where I come from, usually a scientist doesn't bother with communicating that science, which, if you ask me, being, a young millennial, I don't think at it like that because a lot of our scientific community is not attracting novel talent. Nobody really aspires to be a scientist anymore. So it is looked down upon just because scientists have to be serious and they have to fit in that box that we've talked about again. However, I do believe that if we communicate science and why that's fun and why it's important, we're going to have better role models that are going to have more students. More students will drive money towards research in those colleges and faculties and institutions, and they will create, spin-offs and startups, and they will, develop the industry, the space industry in this matter. So yeah, I'm more inclined towards the West culture because I do understand why you kind of want to be creative and speak to the masses and spread the message. But I also come from an environment where that's frowned upon realistically. No one besides me that's doing science is really communicating that online and being a social media communicator or content creator. It's only me, and that does a dab in my professional career here and the perception, because how do I have time to make content while doing all of this serious research? So it's a duality for sure.
Yeah, it can be seen as kind of taking away credibility of a serious scientist in certain circles, which is so unfortunate
Exactly.
because we need to have more representation at different levels and different, not just the astronauts like we were talking about, showing how they've made their way to different esteemed STEM or various programs. I'm always curious with that, and I think it also shows why it's there's so much more just faces from the West on social media and doing science communication. Of course, there's a few people doing amazing work internationally as well. And something else to note is going back, I love the phrase, so I'm going to use it again, octopus hands.
Yeah.
Doing a million
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
doing a degree, doing a startup, doing a this, doing a that, that social media usually is the last thing, the back burner.
For me, that's never a priority. It always suffers. Luckily, I had so much media exposure over the years, and I grew up in the eyes of the media that I kind of accumulated somewhat of a following, but that's not major. That's nowhere near to the most popular Western science communicators. And again, so many internationals have to assimilate in a new culture and work. They have no family to support them, no house, no investment, no car, no credit score, nothing. They're coming from scratch into a new system where they're completely alone, where they have to do their degree and work to sustain themselves, and the money from the family, if they're not as privileged, does not take a while, and they cannot be as supported, especially if they're the first college graduate. And also there's so much problems when it comes to like monetization. So many content creators monetize from social media, from Instagram and TikTok and YouTube in the West world. Here we don't have monetization from IG or TikTok, so it's not an additional incentive for us to pursue that, on top of not being credible if we do that. So it's a different perception and dynamic for sure, that you have to be careful on how you convey yourself and play that card in different circles.
Exactly. And platforms like LinkedIn might be also something that is a little bit more favored in certain countries and spaces of the world. I see definitely, I find so many people that are doing amazing things from just kind of lurking around LinkedIn as well. But I think these conversations are so important, and I'm so excited to have them with so many different people from different perspectives and backgrounds. Really hoping to do two things. First off, to really showcase how varied experience is working in the space industry. And then the second thing is creating
Yeah.
community, because there's a lot of people like you, Martina. There's a lot of people who are so passionate and really want to set their sights to the stars, but these barriers, the many barriers, we've just touched on a handful,
Yeah.
they just keep coming and hitting them. And so this is really, inspiring to hear that you've taken this time to dedicate, and you're still on your way. And by the sounds of it, not giving up anytime soon.
Failure is not an option. And to test the missions before they fly, they have to fail so many times on Earth in analog missions or other testing facilities. So I'm going to keep testing everything until I open doors to so many people, especially young girls like me that can see themselves into the sciences just because of who I am or where I come from. And thank you for platforming me. This is not going to be possible if I don't have the opportunity to talk about this enabled from people like you. So I'm so grateful.
Oh no, it's my pleasure. I'm so happy to be able to share your story and amplify your voice. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Aisha. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Okay, bye-bye for now.
Bye. See you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Universal Inclusion Podcast. If you're interested in learning more about how to get involved in the space industry, follow us on Instagram and TikTok at universal_inclusion. Our passion is amplifying voices in STEAM and STEM and the space industry. If you'd like to be a guest, shoot us a DM. Until next time, ad Astra.